The North Star was a symbol of freedom for slaves. For most, escaping enslavement was an unreality, a dream unattained. If they were caught, they would be punished. One man, however, accomplished the unthinkable feat of helping nearly 2,000 slaves reach Canada, untouched by a slave owner of the South. Levi Coffin, president of the Underground Railroad. It all started in the small Quaker town of New Garden, North Carolina, where Levi was born October 28, 1798. The only son of farmers Levi and Prudence Coffin, Levi spent most of his time on the farm helping his dad. His first experience with slaves had come around the age of 7 when he and his father were walking through the woods. They spotted a line of slaves chained together and asked what they were doing there. The slaves explained that they were being taken from their families and escorted to a slave auction. From that day on, young Levi knew he would fight for the slaves and bring them justice. What set him apart from the other Quakers of New Garden was his fearlessness of the law and his confidence with his values of peace and righteousness rooted in his religious background. He and his cousin taught nearby slaves how to read and write at Sunday school, but they were soon shut down by infuriated slave owners. At the age of 26, Levi married Catherine White, a fellow Quaker who also had a desire to help slaves reach freedom. 1 year later, the couple would have their first of 6 children. Life became unsettling in North Carolina because of the intense slavery. Indiana was the ideal place to move for the Quakers because of the freedom for the slaves, as well as cheap land prices. Levi, Catherine, and some of their Quaker friends moved to Newport, Indiana, now known as Fountain City. It was here where Levi set up his first store selling linseed oil and cutting pork. The red brick house he and Catherine built was soon to become a symbol of security for the many fugitive slaves who traveled the Underground Railroad. The community of Newport was calm and relatively neutral about the issue of slavery. The Coffin's oil store boomed with business, and both Levi and Catherine formed great friendships with their new customers. One day, Levi decided to ask his friends why they didn't help any fugitive slaves who came their way. He was disappointed as they explained that they did not want to face any penalty of the law. For Levi, helping slaves escape enslavement was not a matter of the law, but a matter of defending human rights. Here's where Levi's friendliness and charisma won over the support of the community. He explained to his friends how the Bible taught them to feed the hungry and clothe the naked. His friends, still reluctant to go against the law, agreed with Levi and decided to help him and Catherine guide their slaves to freedom. As community efforts grew, the city became an established location on the map of the Underground Railroad. This eloquence, along with hard work, is what propelled Levi towards his goal of racial equality. At the same time, President Andrew Jackson did not advocate any abolitionist principles. He himself had slaves and believed that over time, the separated Union would overcome their differences. Even though the government stalled any action to unify the nation under abolition, the Coffins were not discouraged. The Underground Railroad and the abolitionist movement spread throughout the nation. Author William Lloyd Garrison published his abolitionist newspaper, The Liberator, which attacked the incentives of slave owners, deeming them immoral and devil-like. Similarly, Garrison's friend Benjamin Lundy founded the Union Humane Society in 1815 and published anti-slavery periodicals. These men were never in contact with Levi, but their participation in the Underground Railroad spread awareness far and deep into the Union. By 1830, only 10 years after moving, Levi and Catherine helped nearly 1,000 slaves find peace and freedom in Canada. They encountered people of all ages, gender, and backgrounds. Levi wrote about the many astonishing slave stories in his autobiography called The Reminiscences.
One company of 28 that crossed the Ohio River into Lawrenceburg, Indiana, 20 miles below Cincinnati, had for a conductor a white man whom they had employed to assist them. The company of 28 slaves referred to all lived in the same neighborhood in Kentucky, and they had been planning for some time how they could make their escape from slavery. This white man, John Fairfield, had been in the neighborhood for some weeks buying poultry from the market. and though among the whites he was assumed to be very pro-slavery, the Negroes soon found that he was their friend. Levi Coffin, The Reminiscences.
This story exemplifies how, as a leader of the abolitionist community, Levi inspired others to go out and help the slaves by any means. But his success as a leader must not overshadow Catherine's efforts. Levi would not have been nearly as successful if it weren't for Catherine's support. She and the other women of Newport had weekly sewing circles where they would make clothes for the fugitive slaves. No matter what time of day, Catherine was willing to make food for the slaves and give them the care they needed.
Levi says that he could not have done this work all of his life had Catherine not believed as strongly as he did and believed as he did that they had to do everything they could to help the oppressed, as he referred to them or whatever. And he says that's what attracted him to her in the first place, knowing her as they were growing up in North Carolina. You know, I joke about the fact that, you know, Levi's down at the store making the arrangements, writing letters, has all the connections, and yet it's actually Catherine here that's providing the care, the clothing, providing food, and just the nurturing part of caring for the runaway slaves.
Perhaps the most astonishing accomplishment was the Coffin's ability to save themselves and their fugitives from slave owners. Hiding places were strategically placed around the house so no slaves were in sight as slave owners came by. Levi and Catherine Coffin moved to Cincinnati to open a new wholesale store. Because of the proximity of Cincinnati to Newport, the Coffins were able to continue their activity in Indiana and build their business in Ohio. Efforts in Cincinnati and Newport were thriving, but the Coffins didn't stop expanding. Later in life, Levi visited Europe on behalf of the English Freemen's Aid Society in 1864 to raise money for freed slaves in America. Within 1 year, he and the other founders raised $100,000 to pay for clothes, money, and education.
So he was well acquainted with several English Quakers. He knew that they would be interested in the Freedmen's Aid Society, this group of people like Levi who was trying to help the slaves gain their freedom, but also then trying to help them get settled and started, in their new lives once they became free. And Levi knew if they were going to be successful, it was with education. So one of the things that they really were trying to do was establish schools for them. And he raised over $100,000. Now again, remember, this is 1863, so it would be interesting to see what that comparison would be today.
Even though slavery was abolished by law in 1865 by the 13th Amendment, it still lived on in a much smaller magnitude. As he aged, Levi's involvement with the Underground Railroad subsided. He began to focus more on his business and local events. He died September 16, 1877, of natural causes. A local newspaper in Cincinnati recalls how his funeral was so crowded that hundreds of people were forced to stand outside the large church. Levi's guiding leadership as the president of the Underground Railroad is visible in this type of legacy that inspires cities, pioneers change, and impacts lives. And shortly after, Catherine died May 22, 1881, of pneumonia. Throughout his life, Levi Coffin's bravery made him to be one of the most influential leaders of his time. The thousands of slaves he and Catherine guided to freedom is a symbol of the hope and encouragement they provided to the community of fugitive slaves. Their legacy of the Underground Railroad will never be forgotten.
Some warned me that my life was in danger, and there were many threats made against me by the slave hunters and those who sympathized with them. But I had no fear of the danger that seemed to threaten my life or my business. If I was faithful to duty and honest and industrious, I felt that I would be preserved.
Roll, Jordan, roll. Roll, Jordan, roll. My soul arise in heaven, Lord, for the year when Jordan roll. Roll, Jordan, roll. Roll.